Bench, the founder of the Aquatic Life Institute. And today we're going to be joined by three wonderful panelists on this panel on neglected species. We're going to have Andre Jimenez from the Shrimp Welfare Project, Daniela Waldhorn from Rethink Priorities, and the one and only Jennifer Jacquet from NYU. This topic is really dear to my heart. As I always used to tell my team, we always look for the unknown unknown. One of the biggest risks in our movement is to kind of simply forget about one species and never address them. So that's why I'm so grateful for our panelists to be working on that very important topic. So let me introduce you our panelists. So Andre Jimenez was actually coming from the private sector first. He has been working for 15 years in investment banking and private equity for Morgan Stanley, Perella Weinberg Partners. He even started his own real estate investment business in 2018. And then he decided he wanted to do the most good in the world, joined the charity incubator, and started the Shrimp Welfare Project with Aaron Brody in 2021. Welcome, Andres. We will also have Daniela Waldhorn from Rethink Priorities. I'm sure a lot of you know about Rethink Priorities, fantastic research institution. Check it out if you haven't before. Daniela is a senior research manager at Rethink Priorities. She investigates different problems and strategies for improving the welfare and lives of non-human animals. Most of our research at Rethink Priorities has focused on the status of invertebrate welfare issues, which is really key to the topic of the day. Before joining Rethink Priorities, Daniela worked for different animal welfare organizations in Europe and Latin America. And finally, as I was mentioning, the one and only Jennifer Jacquet, we could say the queen of octopus, might I add? Jennifer Jacquet is an associate professor in the Department of Environmental Studies at New York University. Jennifer conducts interdisciplinary research on globalized environmental problems, including the wildlife trade, climate change, fisheries, and aquaculture. She led an article making the case against octopus farming and a follow-up letter with more than 100 academic signatories opposing commercial octopus production. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. As usual, we're reminding you that we expect respectful and productive discussion and have zero tolerance for harassment and discrimination of any kind. We're going to start that presentation with Daniela, actually. So Daniela, I'm going to leave the floor to you for your presentation. Go ahead. Thanks, everyone.
Hi, everyone. Can you see my screen?
Yes, all good, Daniela. Ready to go.
Okay. Great. Thank you. So hi, everyone. Thank you all for your time and interest in shrimp welfare. As you know, my name is Daniela Waldhorn, and I work as a researcher at Rethink Priorities. So today I will briefly share with you why we decided to look into the case of shrimp and overview some of the main welfare issues that these animals face. So I will introduce you to the problem, and we'll let Andres deals with the difficult part, that is proposing solutions, but I will also be open to discuss and receive your questions on the topic. So why shrimp and prawns? Well, when it comes to addressing sentience in aquatic crustaceans, there's relatively strong evidence that large decapods like crabs, lobsters, or crayfish could be sentient. However, regarding shrimp, existing evidence is much more limited. So their case is not as strongly supported by available research as that of other decapods. However, there are far more farmed shrimps than there are farmed crabs, for example, and there are many more farmed shrimp than farmed chickens. So even if the case for a shrimp and prawn sentience is weaker than the case of other decapods being sentient, or the case of for chicken and pig sentience, the expected value of helping shrimp may be higher than the expected value of helping crabs or helping chickens or pigs. So despite that, we know very little about the shrimp production. We know very little about how serious an ethical problem it may be and whether there are actionable ways to ameliorate their potential suffering. So I will start by briefly overviewing the problem of shrimp production under the scope, neglectedness, and tractability framework. In general, aquatic invertebrates and in particular crustaceans serve as a major source of human food worldwide. According to fish count, shrimp account for the majority of farm crustaceans worldwide. And they also make up the largest fraction of captured crustaceans. But how many animals is that? Well, thinking of the number of shrimp living on farms, we calculated that around 210 billion farm individuals are alive at any moment. And this figure is equivalent to 2.5 the number of insects alive at any point in time on farms, 2 times the number of farm fishes alive at any time, and about 8 times the number of chickens alive at any moment on farms. And in the following graph, I think you can better appreciate these differences. But furthermore, the number of farm shrimp alive at any moment surpasses any estimate known to date. So other things being equal, the problem of shrimp farming is greater in scope in terms of the number of individuals affected than farming insects or farming any vertebrates for human consumption. Moreover, the number of wild-caught shrimp are particularly concerning. Around 32 trillion wild shrimp are captured in a year. And in total, around 33 trillion shrimp are killed annually for their meat. This graph compares the total number of shrimp killed for consumption with numbers of farm insects that are killed to produce food and feed, and farm and capture fishes slaughtered per year, and chickens killed for their meat. So these figures outnumber any figure of animals killed for their meat known to date. So shrimp in general account for the most animals directly slaughtered for human consumption. And moreover, all these numbers stand to increase in the future. So let's continue with the second criterion. Well, crustacean welfare in general and shrimp welfare in particular are highly neglected. However, there are notable and recent exceptions like the work of Crustacean Compassion, the Aquatic Life Institute, Compassion in World Farming in the UK, a campaign by Animals Australia, raise awareness efforts by Viva, the Shrimp Mother campaign by the Animal Rights Center in Japan, the Shrimp Welfare Project, of course, and a policy initiative led by Vegetarianos Hoy in Chile called Individuals, Not Tones. And I wanted to highlight their campaign. If you want to learn more about it, they gave a talk about it yesterday. Because to the best of my knowledge, it's one of the policy initiatives on this topic with the greatest potential impact. They recently introduced a bill that aims to establish animal welfare standards for farm fish and other aquatic animals, including shrimp, at all stages of production. And among other measures, it also seeks to prohibit the sale of live animals in supermarkets and other retailers. And despite this neglectedness, we have some history of measures taken for the benefit of some crustaceans under human control. But still, I believe that the tractability of this problem should be further explored. But what's wrong with shrimp farming? And how is a shrimp farm like? Well, nowadays, a well-maintained shrimp farm is a sophisticated establishment that consists of different units, including ponds for the shrimp, shrimp breeding and fattening, water control structures, and support facilities such as roads or bridges. And commonly, shrimp are reared in ponds. For example, here you can see an image of a shrimp farm with several large ponds in Thailand, which is very different from super intensive indoor farms where shrimp are reared at high density rates and environmental conditions are closely controlled. Here you can see an example of an indoor intensive farm in Israel where water exchange is limited and instead water is regularly filtrated. Still, we know that less sophisticated farms seem to account for an important part of shrimp production worldwide, as you can see in this picture of a shrimp farm in Vietnam. And farm shrimp of the most commercially important species typically live for a maximum of 6 months. In this picture, you can see an adult white-leg shrimp, which is the most farmed species. And according to our research, some key issues that these animals face have to do with first, poor water quality, which negatively affects the welfare of the shrimp over their whole lives. And some key parameters are oxygen levels, temperatures, or salinity. But while oxygen, for example, is crucial for the animals to breathe, a recent survey in a major producing country like India found that oxygen levels are not usually monitored. Second, we have high numbers of animals per unit area, which mainly depends on the density at which is profitable to operate. On an extensive farm, for example, which are the systems with lower densities, the final area per animal is more or less equivalent to the animal's own length. And in intensive systems, densities are especially high. For example, here you can get a rough idea of how crowded shrimp may be in tanks of intensive facilities. And the above conditions, along with poor maintenance and other factors, weaken the animals and allow pathogens to proliferate. And this results in disease outbreaks. And commonly, diseases can lead to high mortality among shrimp and important financial losses. For decades, farmed shrimp production has been shaped by repeated disease outbreaks, in particular in Asia. And globally, it is estimated that around 40% of farm shrimp biomass is lost prematurely due to disease outbreaks. There are other welfare issues as well. And another thing related to these unfavorable conditions has to do with shrimp reproduction. Commonly, shrimp reared in captivity produce fewer eggs or they may not become sexually mature. And as a consequence, female shrimp used for producing larvae have at least one of their eyes sliced open and squeezed out or cut off with a heated blade to ensure breeding. But why are shrimp mutilated in such a way? Well, female shrimp have a hormonal gland behind their eyes that tells them when to sexually mature. So by cutting the eye, as you can see in the picture, the gland is destroyed, forcing shrimp into rapid sexual maturity. And this procedure is called Stock Ablation and is routinely practiced in shrimp hatcheries around the world. And additionally, when farm shrimp reach their commercial size, they are collected from the ponds and transferred into an ice slurry where they are kept until they die, as you can see in the next slide here. And this is done without prior studying and does not cause immediate death. And this method may be painful, especially to shrimp that are adapted to cold temperatures. So These are some of the main welfare issues that we should take into account, but we should also pay attention to other issues that are associated with shrimp production for getting a better understanding of the whole problem. I will take a very quick look at that. And one of these issues is that most large-scale shrimp fishing is done by bottom trawling. As you know, this method causes catching large numbers of individuals of non-target species, as you can see here in the picture. But while is it true that bycatches are not a problem exclusive to shrimp fishing, shrimp trawling is one of the most indiscriminate kinds of fishing. And why is that? That is because of the small mesh needed to retain shrimp, which practically does not allow other animals to escape. Second issue is that shrimp aquaculture carried out on an industrial scale in countries like India, Vietnam, or Ecuador also results in widespread mangrove destruction and deforestation. And third, in Thailand and other Asian countries, the industry is linked to slave labor conditions. Migrants are trafficked into the industry, forced to work on fishing boats and farms, entering brutal conditions with little hope of escape. So what can we do for shrimp? Well, as you know, my colleagues at the Aquatic Life Institute, Charity Entrepreneurship, and also the Shrimp Welfare Project have been looking into interventions to help farm shrimp. So I will leave you with them, and I appreciate your attention.
All right, I think my video just needs to be enabled by one of the hosts. Maybe one of the hosts can re-enable my video. Sorry, I'm the here. I did perfect. Thank you, I had disappeared. All right, thank you so much, Daniela, for this incredible presentation. Like, let's give it up for Daniela, even though I'm the only one clapping, but I think that's why we're all such fan of Rethink Priorities. You guys are so thorough, you know, and so compelling in the fact that you're sharing. Just as you were sharing your presentation, Daniela, you know, Catalina was just sharing in our ALIs, like, you know, this figure you were sharing, like about 33 trillion shrimp. Those are real staggering numbers, you know, so that's why we're also really grateful for the research you do. You really highlight such an important issue, Daniela. So thank you so much again. And actually, that's a perfect transition because Daniela has made a very strong case as to why we should care about shrimp, and you have also highlighted a lot of work, doing some work on the issue. And now for our second speaker, we have someone who is now dedicated to working on that issue. So we're moving from the research side to the future accompanying side. So Andres, up to you, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Great. I agree with what William just said. We're very grateful for the research that Rethink Priorities and particularly Daniela has done on the topic of shrimp. And full disclaimer, we rely on her work quite a bit. So you will not hear a lot of disagreement from my side. Let me just share my screen. Can you see that?
Yeah, that's all good. Thanks.
Great. Okay, so 0. This is the number, until very recently, the number of charities focusing exclusively on the welfare of these morally relevant beings. This is obviously not to say that there are no organizations which have and are paying attention to this topic. Clearly, we just heard from Daniela and Rethink Priorities, her own work, but also the other work that's being done. So we are actually very fortunate to be standing in the shoulder of giants, so to speak. And by this, I'm clearly referring to this alliance, to the Aquatic Life Institute, Rethink Priorities, Eurogroup for Animals, Crustacean Compassion, Compassion in World Farming, etc. I'm sure I'm missing quite a lot, Animals Asia, etc., and many others. But all of these organizations focus on many different issues, which is completely understandable given the current state of affairs. But it also means that there's a desperate need for organizations to focus exclusively on the welfare of these beings, given the large scale at which they are slaughtered. I would also dare to say that 0 is the number that shrimp represents, even if you round up even to the 10th decimal point, the percentage that it represents of total philanthropic donations. So hence the inclusion into the neglected species talk. Now, 380 billion. This is a number that stands in very stark contrast to the 0 that we just saw. And this is the midpoint of the estimated number of shrimp which are killed each year in farms, according to Rethink Priorities. The numbers that you just heard from Daniela are the number of animals alive at any point in time. Given that there's more than one cycle per year, this is the estimated midpoint of the number of shrimps that are killed each year in farms. And out of these 380 billion, there's one species that represents the lion's share, and that is Pacific white-leg shrimp, which is the species that we at Shrimp Welfare Project focus on trying to help. Just one more kind of point of comparison, in addition to the ones that Daniela already gave, 380 billion is almost 4 times the total number of humans who have ever lived in this planet. And it is the number that gets Aaron, my co-founder, and me out of bed every morning. And it's not only concerning in its own, but it's also growing at a very fast pace, with some analysts assuming that it will double within this decade. So that speaks to the importance of why we are focusing on this topic. But if you're joining this talk, you're probably already considered that this is important, and the title of the topic is neglectedness. So now focusing on the other part, which is tractability, which Daniela also touched upon. As you heard from her, there is a large number of welfare concerns that should and could be addressed. From our side, if we were to characterize it in big buckets, there's infectious diseases, as Daniela mentioned. We don't focus specifically on that. We touch upon it through other welfare interventions, but infectious diseases is something that is very much in the radar of industry. At any survey of farmers that you look at, diseases are identified as the #1 priority that the industry wants to solve. So there's strong financial incentives for the industry itself to address this. So we focus on other issues that are not necessarily being have such a strong financial incentive. So the first one is Stock Ablation. You already heard from Daniela what this horrible practice entails. This is a short duration but very high stress, and it's by far the most visibly barbaric practice in the shrimp farming cycle in nurseries. It involves crushing, slicing, cutting. There's different methods, but essentially eliminating one eye to induce sexual maturation. Thankfully, there's been groundbreaking work from our very own Simão Zacarias and his colleagues at the University of Stirling, through which they have proven this practice to be unnecessary. And I invite all of you who are interested in the topic to read his research. It is publicly available. Simão was actually, because of this research, he was awarded the 2020 Global Aquaculture Innovation Award. He's probably one of the people who have helped shrimp the most, and we're very honored to have him as part of our board of advisors since the very beginning. For the purposes of this talk, I'll just highlight which is, in my opinion, which are the most relevant aspects of his research. The first one is that non-ablated females have higher fecundity and survival than ablated females. Their offspring, this is very important, grow to similar sizes and at similar rates, and they are more resistant to certain stress tests that they are subjected to, and more resistant to early mortality syndrome and white spot virus disease, which are two of the most prevalent diseases affecting farm shrimp. And in conclusion, ablation can be eliminated without sacrificing productivity. So why is this not the sole focus of our intervention? The answer is twofold. The first is that from what we have been able to gather, this practice affects less than 5 million shrimps per year. This is a huge number in and of itself, but as we've seen, as a proportion of the staggeringly huge number of animals that are farmed each year, it represents 0.001% of the total number of shrimps. And the second reason why this is not our sole focus is that by speaking to experts, including Simão, we perceive that this practice is in decline and indeed has already been phased out by some large players in Central and South America and some in countries in Southeast Asia, particularly in Thailand, and they've eliminated this practice entirely from their supply chains. So in this sense, if we were to focus exclusively on this issue, on a best case scenario, we would have a limited impact by merely accelerating the phase out of this practice, which is already in decline and industry is trying to address proactively. On the worst case scenario, we would be sending the wrong message that this is the only or the most relevant welfare issue faced by shrimp. Next, we have slaughter. Crustaceans are currently not covered under UK or EU regulation in relation to slaughter. And as you heard from Daniela, for the most part, shrimp are taken out of the water and they are submerged in saltwater ice slurry between 0 and 4 degrees, in which their heart rates and brain functions decrease and eventually they die. The problem with this is that recommended immersion times can be quite long and it can take long time for animals to die. Thankfully, there are some organizations, notably Compassion in World Farming, who are looking into improving the conditions of slaughter of white-leg shrimp and have even run trials with Tesco and Hilton Seafood to test the first large-scale electrical stunning system. And I invite you to look at their case study. It's on their website. It's very interesting to read and very promising. We at Shrimp Welfare Project, we're very excited that an organization of their caliber is targeting this issue, and we hope that our work in raising the voice of shrimp will be accretive to their work. And all in all, we feel that this promises to be a tractable issue, which should be possible to be adopted by large producers in the relative short term, as the main bottleneck to its adoption would appear to be the availability and affordability of the technology. Finally, we have the welfare concerns that we at Shrimp Welfare Project focus the most on. This image that you see here is how your average extensive shrimp farm would look like in Southeast Asia. And at Shrimp Welfare Project, we're focused on addressing the issues that you do not see with the naked eye, but which are the ones that shrimp face in certain farms continuously and for most of their lives if the farm is not managed with a concern for welfare. The first of these issues is water quality. As you already heard from Daniela, water quality is a potentially very large driver of shrimp welfare. It is also very complex. Water quality encompasses many different variables, including but not limited to dissolved oxygen, which is the level of oxygen in the water, temperature, salinity, pH, and many other things. And they all interact with one another. So why do we feel that water quality is the most impactful welfare intervention that we can do? Just if we take oxygen as an example, below certain levels, it's true that shrimp die, and that happens. particularly in shrimp in farms where stocking density is quite high. But at slightly higher levels, even those shrimp that survive can suffer greatly. They struggle to move, to eat and grow, and to fight disease, given that their immune systems get compromised. Just as virtually every other animal in the world, shrimp need oxygen to survive and thrive. Fortunately, improving dissolved oxygen appears to be tractable. At risk of stating the obvious, for those of you not familiar with aquaculture, this is a paddle wheel aerator used to increase the level of oxygen in the water. It basically splashes water around and allows for oxygen to filter into the pond better. I'm not suggesting that that just running aerators will solve the issue of water quality and dissolved oxygen. Oxygen many times is not the cause, but rather the symptom of a problem. For example, if feeding is not done correctly. In that sense, we are conducting visits to farms in India during December to determine the best course of action for the identified most prevalent issues that we find. The other one of our biggest focus issues is stocking density. And stocking density also has a lot of ramifications, some of which are it induces increased stress, which can cause compromised immune systems as well, which leads to greater susceptibility of disease, ease of spread of such diseases, higher levels of ammonia in the water, which poisons shrimps and can kill them, etc. So this is a very important point for us to bear in mind as well. Changing gears completely, here's a snapshot of the global shrimp and prawn market. On the left-hand side, you'll be able to see that most shrimps are produced in Asia, particularly in China, in India, and in Southeast Asia. The top 10 producing countries, the production is very concentrated. The top 10 producing countries account for almost 95% of total production. We are here not showing the exporters, but the largest ones are Ecuador, India, Vietnam, and Indonesia. And a very significant portion of the market actually is destined to export, and it goes to markets such as the United States. You see the largest importers by value on the right-hand side. It's the United States, China, Japan, and then Europe taken as a whole. Actually, Europe and the US combined account for more than 50% of the total import market. In our opinion, this is very important that it goes to markets such as the US and Europe, given that traditionally these markets have shown greater concern for animal welfare, which gives us a lever to work with corporates, as you'll see in the next slide. It's worth noting that the work that Crustacean Compassion is doing certainly helps the needle move further in that direction of greater welfare concern for crustaceans. Our strategy, very simply put, is that we will work what we call the demand side with corporates, requesting them to commit to sourcing shrimp being produced under certain minimum welfare standards. And our main asks will include requiring their suppliers to meet certain water quality metrics, limiting stocking densities, and eventually incorporating more humane slaughter practices and reduce Stock Ablation. And as part of our supply side work, we intend to work with farmers to improve water quality. The intention is to identify farmers that are part of the supply chain of the organizations that we will be working on the demand side. And ultimately, what we would want to achieve in the medium term is to foster the emergence of a market for higher welfare shrimp, which is more benevolent to shrimp, to the environment, and to farmers. That's all. One last note is we're particularly keen to identify more organizations who are already working with farmers in India and in Vietnam in particular, who could be interested in partnering with us to run our pilot test. So if you're one of such organizations or know of any, please do contact us at the email that you see on your screen or via the WOVA app. And if there's anything else you think might help us, including critical feedback, please also contact me. Thank you very much. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much, Andres, for that presentation. And again, thank you so much for having done that transition, from the private sector to then funding that charity. I really commend you on that. I think that's really admirable when people leave and then join the nonprofit world to try to make a difference. And also congrats to all our attendees who are working at nonprofit. So now we've explored the small ones, the tiny individuals. And as you've seen, like from this presentation, one of the issues is that the smaller an animal is, the more numerous they will be. That's kind of what is driving those giant numbers, the fact that shrimp are so small. And if you think about human beings, we wouldn't say that the baby is worth less than the grown-up adult, It's not because you're small that your moral value is smaller. You can make some argument about sentience, but still, I think there's a very compelling argument that there is a huge moral case for shrimp here. Now that we've explored the tiny individual and very numerous, now we're going to move on to the very, very smart individual with, I dare say, the queen of octopus, Jennifer Jacquet. There's also like a personal aspect to Jennifer being here today. I have to kind of thank Jennifer for the start of ALI, because I actually started ALI after a meeting with Professor Becca Franks, who worked with Jennifer. So in a sense, maybe we're all here today indirectly thanks to you, Jennifer. So thanks for that. So with that, I'm gonna leave the floor to you.
That's quite a stretch and very generous, and it's nice to see you and be here today. Thank you so much for hosting this wonderful event. So as William said, I'm here to talk about octopus, which are not neglected in many ways. They're very much on people's radar. They've seen YouTube videos, and of course, last year saw my octopus teacher, saw it win the Academy Award, saw it win the BAFTAs, and there is the species in this film, Octopus Vulgaris, is the species actually that's being most considered, the most effort is being dedicated toward its cultivation. And so it's a weird paradox in a way, I think, for octopus, that they're in this moment of stardom, and at the same time, a great number of people, governments, industries, are trying to subject them to mass production. And Becca and I had the opportunity to we went to a screening of the film and did a Q&A about it. We're wearing Do Not Farm Octopus shirts there. If you are interested in those, please reach out to me. But there's a moment in the film, if you've seen it, that is quite, you might argue in a harsh word, dishonest, in the sense that Craig Foster goes into the scientific literature about octopuses. And he's talking then about their basic characteristics, their personality, curiosity, cognition, the points that William was obviously highlighting in terms of intelligence. But if the third result in a Google Scholar search for Octopus vulgaris will bring up this aquaculture potential of the common octopus. So in a way, the film completely ignores this potential for them, this potential fate, and focuses exclusively on their life in the intertidal zone. And I was not aware of this effort that was occurring in the early 2000s. Of course, many, almost hundreds of paper about octopus aquaculture and production, many of which, again, are focused on vulgaris as a species, Octopus maya a little bit as well. And this, I work on aquaculture sort of as a system, on fisheries as a system. And this fit into me with this problem that we're facing in aquaculture in general, which is the increasing unsustainable growth of aquaculture, because we're subjecting more and more species to domestication who are carnivorous. And the octopus is no exception. I mean, octopuses are completely carnivorous. They do not have the enzymes to to even eat a plant-based diet. And so not only do we have to consider the impacts on the octopus themselves, which are bad enough, but we will have to fish to feed octopus in captivity as well. And this is part and parcel with a fundamental problem with aquaculture growth at the moment. And I'll say that launching point is actually, I think, a huge benefit to look at this intersectional work between the environmental impacts and potentially other impacts of aquaculture and the animal welfare aspects of aquaculture. We've seen in recent years the way that factory farming has gotten so much more attention because of its impacts on climate change. It's brought these communities together who had been fighting separately for changes with climate change, changes with animal welfare, and now they're working together. So I want to emphasize my own particular intersectional research, which is not just to minimize the environmental impacts, the impacts on the broader ecology, the nitrogen outputs, but to minimize the animal welfare impacts. Of course, those overlap because, again, if you're farming carnivores, you have these knock-on effects to causing even more suffering than animals that rely on a plant-based diet. And then something that Andres mentioned too, in the realm of shrimp, yes, US consumers, European consumers do care about welfare, but they are not food insecure. And typically these industries, and you see this with the octopus industry, will, in a public-facing way, talk about the need to increase food production. And yet this is a luxury market that they're targeting. And I'll show you some evidence of that. And so challenging those narratives by the industry that this is necessary to feed people. Very obviously, shrimp is not about feeding people. It's about a luxury good for cruise ships, essentially, and restaurants. So the way that I found out about octopus farming was an article that came across my desk from The Conversation in 2014. Saying that octopus could be the next big thing in aquaculture, because again, I hadn't been Googling Octopus Vulgaris in a scholar search. And when I saw this, I thought, what? You know, there should be a public conversation about this question. This is a huge ethical conversation at the very least. The other thing it got me thinking of in terms of strategy as an academic, but as somebody interested in activism, of course, in changing the world, is how we can be mobilized to work preemptively on problems that are on the horizon that have not been sort of embedded in infrastructure or laws or governance yet. So that's part of also why the octopus farming question is very compelling to me. But of course, the animals themselves drive the majority of my motivation. So Octopus vulgaris being considered for farming in part because it's a very fast growing species. It has a short lifespan. Again, it will go to luxury markets that are willing to pay top dollar. And the argument that the industry also often uses is that it creates jobs. But the reason that this has not happened, that octopus are not yet subject to mass production, has nothing to do with ethics and everything to do with a technological challenge of closing the life history, the life cycle. And the industry has not yet figured out how to close the life cycle. And so many of these operations are actually ranching operations, where they collect egg or the larval stage, and then they grow them to adulthood and then sell them. So Spain is a major actor behind octopus farming, a major investor, and a primary market for the final product. And again, from our point of view, we took this intersectional research or agenda that I mentioned and looked at the environmental impacts, the animal impacts, and the food security impacts of this species and just said, look, we're not going to work within your paradigm. We're not going to improve the animal welfare science for octopus. We really don't want this industry to get off the ground to begin with. Octopuses, again, are entirely carnivorous. They will have these nitrogen outputs. They will put additional pressure on wild species. I don't need to convince you that they're capable of conscious experience or pain or curiosity. But needless to say, a life in captivity or mass production is completely incompatible with their existence. And this has nothing to do with food security, as I mentioned. These are animals that are consumed as opposed to eaten, which I think is a really important distinction. These primarily are luxury markets. And you know this because if you look at the octopus literature, they will talk about, hey, look, this is talking about octopus market in general for capture and farmed, but they're talking about it being for exotic, rising demand for exotic meat, rising disposable income, and the preferences for healthier foods are shifting consumption toward octopus. This is not about feeding the world. And if it was, of course, we would be thinking much more in the plant department, because we know that we could actually have more food if we were plant-based. But just to show you some of the nutrition facts, here's octopus on the top, here's tofu on the bottom. To the extent, there's the tofu, you have to eat more in terms of ounces, but the protein quantity, the caloric quantities are about the same between these two products. So we took this non-traditional approach, as I mentioned. I basically talked to Becca Franks, who William mentioned, who is an animal welfare scientist, and I talked to Peter Godfrey Smith, who has not traditionally been involved in the animal protection movement at all, but of course is very interested in the conscious experience of octopuses, and Walter Sanchez Suarez, who is trained as an animal welfare scientist and also is from Spain. And we started to work on an article, again, combining those three ways of looking at the octopus problem. And our arguments were that, the octopus farming is still in an experimental phase. We still have a choice. We do not have to endorse or allow this industry to get off the ground. And it was an opportunity to get further in front of this issue, both in terms of welfare, potentially mislabeling laws around octopus. Maybe we could introduce a farmed import ban of octopus before, again, this industry got underway. And what we noticed was that octopus farming was supported internationally, but by very few companies, research institutions, universities, and governments. And so we wanted to write this article in part to challenge that investment, to make a normative claim that would get those institutions, or maybe get activists to put pressure on those institutions to reflect on whether or not they should be making those investments. It was very hard to get our article published and peer-reviewed. Ultimately, it was published through the popular arm of the National Academy of Sciences, because the traditional science journals did not like our normative message. This is from an editor at one journal who asked that we have a more balanced perspective. They said our argument was very unbalanced. They didn't like the title of the piece, which is called "The Case Against Octopus Farming," and it was not up for debate that we would do a systematic review of the literature, which would be entirely in favor of octopus farming, because that's where the investment has been so far. So we published this in early 2019. And it got a lot of coverage by the popular media then, which was wonderful to see the way that the argument had traction in the broader conversation, including in The Guardian. This is us again at that presentation, where Robin McKee did one of the big initial stories on our work. And then we followed that up in part because of a conversation with Compassion in World Farming about what might be useful to their campaigns moving forward, with the open letter that William mentioned right at the beginning, with over 100 purely academic signatories, including Dan Dennett, the philosopher, Peter Singer, the philosopher, but also ecologists signed on to this. So we were trying to build a coalition of people who were maybe not traditionally involved in issues like this, and that was really heartening to see. sociologists signed on to the letter. And then earlier this year, on World Octopus Day in October, Compassion in World Farming did launch their own octopus factory farming campaign against octopus in farming in Europe. And then they also had an initiative in Hawaii, which was really nice to see. So it's great to see the way that these academic articles are taken up and used by activists, and I think get a lot of traction, especially because they're better at graphics than we are in our reports. And so we rely a lot, on the popular media to represent these issues, because we write text and then the popular media will talk about them. And almost all the coverage that we got of this issue there was a problem in that they always included a photo of an octopus in the wild doing its thing and talking about octopus farming, which is not the right visual representation, because this is not what octopus farming is going to look like. Again, this was common across so many different outlets. This is Time Magazine at the top. At least they have, somebody cutting into or handling an octopus, but it's still not an octopus farm. So I worked with artists I'd worked with in the past who are really interested in dystopian algorithmic work. And we put together this image of what an octopus farm might actually look like. Like, this is what we're looking at for the future. It's not a beautiful solitary octopus on a coral reef. It is mass production, it's factory farming, and it is very much on the horizon. So we have some new work on who is making the investments in the science behind octopus farming. We've searched the web of science, working with a graduate student here in animal studies from Chile. We found 218 scientific papers on octopus aquaculture, and we've looked at the funders for that work. And actually, governments are the biggest funders. It's not industry, and especially the European Commission. And especially government support within Spain, Mexico, and Chile. So our next goal is to target those investments as immoral, hopefully mobilize students against these kind of investments. And the other thing, of course, that just came across my radar earlier this month is Nueva Pesca Nova, Spanish private industry, is planning the world's largest octopus farm. And so we are, we have not won this battle whatsoever. I think we drew a good line in the sand, but we are still desperately in need of more support, more visibility for the issue, and to prevent the moral license for octopus farming to ever come into existence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for this amazing presentation, and also for this amazing work that you've been doing. You look at those giant octopus brains. How can you argue that they are super smart, and valuable of moral consideration? I think it's really inspiring, to see the impact that one person, one piece of research can have, especially within those very neglected areas. And so that's why, again, I commend all the audience for participating to all this talk of the Aquatic Life Conference and being part of the solution together. Also, I'm just going to make a little acknowledgement. LI does not discriminate against any fish species, but octopus are still my favorites, but don't put it here. So with that being said, we're going to move on to the Q&A part of the session. So we have like 5 minutes left. So I was suggesting of maybe running possibly 5 minutes overtime to have time to address some of the questions. So we are going to start with a question for Daniela and Andres. From an effective altruism lens, how should advocates prioritize species to advocate for? Which one should we start first? Which one would be more effective? What other species are neglected? Maybe Daniela, if you want to go first.
Yeah, I think broadly through effective altruistic lens, we would assess different animal welfare problems by comparing their scope, their neglectedness, and tractability. And shortly, it refers to prioritize causes or sub-causes, taking into account the numbers of individuals affected and how serious their suffering may be, and how many people and resources are already dedicated to tackling this problem, and how easy it would be to make progress on those problems. But when we are comparing problems in which the individuals involved belong to different species, I think any pertinent comparison requires also considering potential differences across species, at least on differences on their likelihood of being sentient, their capacity for welfare, that is the range of how good or bad an individual's life can be, and third, the degree to which an individual suffering and welfare matter morally. So I'm aware that some of the above factors rely on questionable or unsolved philosophical assumptions. For example, when comparing different species, we may not be able to provide answers with high degrees or of certainty to how the suffering of those individuals should be weighed. But even if such considerations are omitted when comparing two different problems, we must anyway make an implicit assumption regarding the individual's moral status, for instance, that they should be assigned equal consideration. So I think even if there's no high confidence estimates of sentience or moral status that could be made when comparing individuals of different species, I think an explicit estimate is preferable to any non-fully transparent criteria. Yeah, and regarding the questions about other individuals being neglected, an important issue here is not specifically to, these are not specifically aquatic animals, but something related to the problem that we are discussing here is the massive production of insects to be used as food and feed. But this industry, this new industry is emerging mostly to feed the aquaculture industry. It's not going to produce protein to feed the world and people who may not have proper access to proteins, or is not something that is going to solve hunger. The industry that is growing mainly in Europe and in the US is going to provide further resources to the aquaculture industry.
Great, thank you so much, Daniela. Andres, would you like to chime in on that question, maybe with the flavor of like which specific shrimp species you're going to tackle, etc.?
I was going to actually say that also from a effective altruism perspective, I would invite everyone to also consider the portfolio approach. So these are clearly quite neglected species, and all of them require attention, or all of it could benefit significantly from attention, as we were just mentioning earlier. Shrimp before very recently had 0 organizations focusing exclusively on them, and I'm sure that's the case also for other species. And I think if we are focusing on one species specific, white-leg shrimp, but I think it would be quite important also to address, just remaining in the narrow focus of shrimp, figuring out a way to help the wild caught shrimp, which are in the trillions, as you heard already from Daniela.
Great, thank you so much. Now we have a question actually from Haven, the founder of the Fish Welfare Initiative, who is with us. Thank you so much, Haven. So for Jennifer, what specific advocacy work do you think should be undertaken now to prevent octopus farming? Is it more like lobbying government, shaming corporation? Which countries do you think this work should be focused on first? Maybe just Spain or some other country? Do you think it would be helpful to have other NGOs in addition to Compassion working in the space?
Absolutely. I would love to see more efforts and across the board. You know, one thing that we've been talking to lawyers in New York about is whether or not New York City could be the first to pass an import ban, a preemptive ban on importing farmed octopus, to send a signal, again, a strong legislative signal to the world that this product is not welcome here. And so I think we need to think strategically and preemptively rather than trying to address the problem in 10 years from now. And whoever, I mean, New York is a great place to do that. You know, we have a new mayor-elect who's very sympathetic to animal issues. So we're sort of hopeful about the possibility in the next 4 years. But we definitely need Europeans to run a hard game over there. And just the Spanish diaspora in general, you know, Mexico and Chile have been supported through the Spanish government to increase production. And so we need a lot of help, I think, in Latin America as well. China and even Japan to some extent will also be really important geographic areas, I think, for a kind of resistance. But there is not, you know, it's not a everywhere in the world question in the same way that, let's say, capture fisheries are. So I do think there's good strategy that can be deployed. As I say, I'm quite interested in the preemptive import bans, but bans on production would also be really incredible. It's just that in the U.S. context, that's not where people are talking about putting their investments currently.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. We have another question, maybe for Daniela and Andres. So basically, out of all the potential intervention for shrimp, taking into account the number of individuals who would be impacted, the tractability, the impact of each intervention, for example, between water quality, stock ablation, density, etc. Which one would you think is the most effective intervention we should focus on first for shrimps? If you had to pick just one of them.
So I think here I'm speaking, I'm sure, with a vested interest, but we at Shrimp Welfare Project, we believe that water quality interventions are potentially the most impactful. There is an interesting publication by Charity Entrepreneurship, who are the program to which we were incubated, which tries to estimate the impact on welfare of different interventions, and water quality turns out to be significantly higher than other interventions, given the number of animals and sort of the duration to which shrimp are exposed to that welfare, let's say, violation.
Great, thank you so much, Andres. And in the interest of time, since we are running over time, we're going to just share with you some of the other questions that we had. One was kind of, again, for Andres, on like specific disease. So what are the best ways to prevent shrimp from contracting disease? Another one, do you think beneficial bacteria can help shrimp build up their immunity and develop good resistance from viruses like white spot disease? We had also other questions from the audience, which is similar to the question we asked before on the effectiveness of supply side intervention as opposed to policy intervention. So if we want to do maybe one final round, maybe first Daniela, then Andres, and then Jennifer to address some of these questions, or have any final thoughts to conclude that conversation.
Daniela, do you want to go first? Maybe with relation to white spot syndrome, I would say the key ways to avoid it is by stocking SPF larvae, so specific post-larvae free animals when putting them into grow-out ponds. Good water pond treatment of the water and the pond prior to putting the post larvae in, and minimizing stress to shrimp to make sure that, and minimizing stress, and by that I mean a host of different things, including good water quality to foster a healthy immune system, I would say. With relation to white spot syndrome. And then there's very good research relating to the use of probiotics to foster also immune system improvements in shrimp.
Great, thanks, Andres. Daniela, do you have any final word or some comments on supply side versus policy?
Adding just a couple of ideas to what Andres said. the problem with shrimp farming is that invertebrates' immune system like doesn't work as the immune system of vertebrate animals. So we have like a specific challenges, and definitely a way to prevent some serious disease outbreaks is related to improving farming conditions and limit stocking densities. And also incorporating biosecurity measures to prevent disease outbreaks. That is something that the industry is very interested in because disease outbreaks can cause major financial losses. Yeah, I think that is why I wanted to add. And regarding actions and effectiveness for helping shrimp, whether in the supply or demand side, I think a lot depends on where our resources are. I think in general, corporations in the UK and some of them in Europe may be interested in incorporating some welfare standards for shrimp. And probably this is related to a broader discussion about crustacean welfare that has been accelerated and promoted by organizations like Crustacean Compassion as well.
Great, thank you so much, Daniela. And yeah, we wish we had more time. And so now we're going to conclude with Jennifer. If you have any final comments, or some people were also asking about the slaughter process for octopus and shrimp, how it differs from fish, but we may not have time to get into that. Or if you have any final call to action for the audience as they want to get engaged.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hesitant. I basically don't want to go there for octopus because I want to stay in the moral domain of this is not right. There's nothing we can do to make it right. There's nothing we can do to improve the slaughter or improve their environment that will make this industry okay, because it has so many problems across the board. And as I understood the question, it was like supply, like private industry supply or government policy. And with octopus farming, it's really hard to not see how entangled they are. They are supported, as you can see by the comments in the chat. Spain is making these major investments, but totally with the concessions and help and subsidies of the government, both through the science and otherwise. So we really have to focus on both for production interventions, period. And of course, consumers might be interesting down the road, but I do think governments and private industry are where at least I'm putting my efforts. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much. And yeah, I wish we had more time. You know, it's just such an important subject, and that's why I wanted to be the moderator for that panel. That was my favorite panel. Don't repeat it, you know. So yeah, really grateful for your presentation. Really grateful for your work on that. Really grateful to the audience for engaging on that topic, because to make progress together, we all need to talk about those issues. So thank you so much again for everyone. Apologies for running over time. We will be back actually in just 2 minutes with our next panel. So hope to see you guys again soon. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.